1962. After that, he went to work for a new agency, which had been formed by President Nixon, called the Environmental Protection Agency. He subsequently then received his Master's of Law degree at the University of Miami. Now, Dennis, at this point, after military service, for his accumulated credits, could have taken a different course, path, and direction in his life, but he did not. He took a course that led him, thankfully, in 1973 to Palm Beach County, where he became this county's first environmental control officer. He discerned the job offers from Wall Street. He walked away from opportunities for millions of dollars in monetary reward. He instead directed his attention to causes that he believed in and issues that he wanted to address. And those of you who served with him when he came to Palm Beach County know that he was so sincere in his beliefs about the environment that he signed the important documents in green. He advocated responsible growth, creating and preserving an environment that we all could relish and cherish. And he also was responsible for the acquisition of the environmentally sensitive lands and access to beaches, and those beaches that we enjoy today. Without his efforts, largely we would not have those resources available to the public today. During this same period of time, Dennis, as we fondly remember, let his hair down, shall I say, let it grow even longer. And
Gay, Josh, Brittany. Obviously, we would all be rather not here today. We'd rather Dennis was still with us, but those things are the way they go. I'd like to welcome everybody here, of course, all the VBA members. I represent all 65,000 of them who wish you nothing but the highest condolences for your loss, and we will all miss it. I got to know Dennis back in 1983 at the VBA's first national convention, which was a kind of an interesting time, which most of us will never talk about. There's probably still statute of limitations out there to make cover things. Certainly a lot different than the old guys that gather now. 30 years makes a lot of difference. And I got to know Dennis because, yes, he stood out because he was even taller than I am, and I'm pretty darn tall. And he also had a partner with him from Florida, Dennis Koehler. Terry Koehler, I'm sorry. And they were known as the Twin Towers, as we called them. This was, of course, long before 9/11. And I had the privilege of and we really know that the work that Dennis did on the campaign for getting full funding for the VA, making sure that we had advanced funding, that was one of the biggest things that Dennis pushed very hard. He got the rest of us in line and we moved forward, and as usual he took command and we got it done. And so despite all of this nonsense about, you know, whether the government was going to shut down or whatever, the VA was going to function because it had a budget. And we can thank Dennis for that. No question about it. He was one of the prime movers behind that. And so all veterans should thank Dennis for having gotten that done. And so, again, as I say, this is not a happy time, but I'm glad that I had an opportunity to come today to express our condolences on behalf of the members of the VA. Thank you.
thank you, John. That he was the motivating factor. The list was exhaustive, but two things I have to mention is Friends of Veterans in conjunction with the Vietnam veterans, and also Friends of the Fisher House. Fisher House located on the campus of the Veterans Administration Hospital. Dennis served on the board there, and it is a place where families of those veterans receiving medical care can stay free of charge. It is funded entirely out of our own donated pockets, and we encourage your consideration of the Fisher House if you have the spirit that moves you to give to those families of veterans. I remember significantly in the early 1980s the issue of Agent Orange and those chemical defoliants used in Southeast Asia. I know that Tom Corey and Dennis and so many others worked very, very hard on the research and the development of legislation and guidelines so that physicians can recognize the sequelae of Agent Orange and how it was impacting the returning veterans of Vietnam. More recently, Dennis received word and a request from help from a local veteran who had been involved in a traffic mishap, and he had received compensation to pay those medical bills associated with his care. Unfortunately, pursuant to guidelines of the federal government, as a result of receiving compensation from this source, his disability benefits were severed. They were ended. Dennis took it upon himself to contact Alcee Hastings, other members of Congress, and was responsible for the creation of legislation which ended that process and more equitably and fairly treated the veteran. That was always Dennis's theme every working day in his efforts for not only veterans, but for you and for me and our children. We were given an example of how people face the crisis of cancer by Joshua's mother, Justice Barbara Pariente, Florida Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we saw in Dennis another example of courage when we saw him with his struggle with that illness. And all of us would have to agree, and we have spoken to others, that when we visited with Dennis in those hours of treatment, that it was his attitude that inspired us. It was his courage that inspired us, and the dignity that will continue to remind us and inspire us of the person he was. One more person we'd like to ask to come forward, a gentleman by the name of Jordan Kessler, who is a close family friend. If Jordan had made it here, we would appreciate his comments.